Good afternoon, Justin. Ooh, that's hot.
Good evening.
There's a new component in the sound system up there, and Michael's all excited about it, and it should have us sounding really professional.
Oh, yeah. Oh, mercy.
I know, we can't get too excited because it's evidently a lot louder than the old one.
Oh,
No, it's pretty cool stuff up there.
that
It was
sounds
time for an
cool.
update. That other board had been up there for 15 years probably, at least. I don't know, 12, 10 or 12 anyway, I bet. So it's good to upgrade those components from time to time. If we could just upgrade some of my components that are wearing out.
Well, yeah, we might have to put this way over here. So,
All right. Well, did you enjoy the warmer weather on the farm?
well, I mean, today I was almost sweating. I mean, it was hot.
Are the cows happier?
Well, not really. It's starting to get muddier. So,
Oh, yeah, that's
it's
gross.
a trade-off, But
Yeah.
we'll take it as it comes. There's a lot of snow for fertilizer and good deeds there for the water. So, we're blessed. Either way,
There
it's
you
like
go.
you can, if you frame it in, well, this is just the worst. I can't believe it. Well, that's the outlook you choose to have. But
it's
if you look, hey man, we've got snow, we've got fertilizer. The cows are going to get more water. We don't even have to go. I mean, the other day I didn't even have to go break ice for them.
Ooh,
It's
nice.
I mean, it's so great. I mean,
Yeah.
in days where it gets really cold, that's my entire job. I show up to work, I get a hatchet, and I go to this water, and I chip the ice there. And I mean, it gets about that thick overnight, and I go to the next one and chip the ice, and I go to the next one and chip the ice, and then I get in my pickup and go to the other one and chip the ice, and go to the next one and chip the ice, and go to the next one and chip the ice. Then I go back around to the stock tanks and chip the ice there, and then I go do it again.
Just go, well, cows got to drink, I guess.
They drink a lot, and I'm getting a lot of hatcheting skills.
Well,
So-
that's good. If you ever get the axe, that's,
I don't know how they'd do it without me if I get the axe, but
well, I didn't hatchet anything over the cold period, so you're ahead of me. Well, where are we at?
well, we're about halfway through John 19.
About halfway
It
through
seems
John
like,
19. We're taking a scenic route through John 19, but it's really good stuff, and it's good that we're getting some good discussion on it and lots of good thoughts. So that's okay.
Well, I think it's good. Yeah, I mean, I know in the last couple class periods we've been talking a lot more about speculation and looking at the text and trying to make the text come to life, because
Yeah.
it's you're reading these words and it might be a story you've heard many times, but just trying to make it feel something different, engage
Right.
not only our thoughts and we're reading this, but also what it would have felt like, what it would have been like, what
Right.
would have been going through people's minds that were in this event. Again, obviously that isn't something we can read straight from the text, but it's something as Christians that we can look at this period of Jesus' life and really try to connect with the fact that this is the person, this is the man that we not only claim to follow, but that we claim is God.
Right. And I think anything we can do to personalize the story makes it more impactful for us and more meaningful as we consider, not just the raw details of what's going on, but to see what they saw, to feel what they felt, to hear what they heard, to think what they thought, even as best we can, and to put ourselves into those positions is really good for us. And it does make the story come alive in a way that doesn't when we just read it on the page and just leave it in the black and white. The black and white is important, and it's probably the most important part of it. When you think about it, because it is the story, it is the detail, it is the gospel, but letting that gospel impact you is I think a valuable part of the process of reading the story. So we are, as you said, about halfway through John 19, and in John 19 we have Jesus being delivered over. And we talked at length about this last week, but who was he delivered over to be crucified? Because it says Pilate gave them over to him after the Jews had requested that he be crucified. So Pilate gave him over to the soldiers to be crucified at the behest of the Jewish leadership. So really, he lets them decide Jesus' fate. He lets them decide Jesus' punishment, even though Pilate has stated, I find no guilt in him. So by Pilate's reasoning, by Pilate's bar of justice or whatever, Jesus should be released, but he delivers them over to the punishment that the Jews have preordained for him, which is crucifixion. And so he sends them over to the guards to be crucified. And at the place of the skull, he is crucified. We made it through verses 16 through 22 last week, or 17 through 22, where we talked about the inscription that was placed there and what Pilate had written as part of the inscription. The Jews didn't like that. But Pilate said, this is what I've written. I've written what I've written. And was it written for the purpose of making fun of the Jews, or was it written as a way of showing that he, or was it written as sincerely as a way of him, so that he could report to Rome, I've crucified a king. This really was an insurrectionist or something along those lines. So we speculated about some of those things a little bit, because we're not really given into the inside or into the mind of Pilate why he did it. He just said, hey, I've done what I've done and I'm not going to change it. And so he doesn't care that the Jews don't like what he wrote. He's going to leave it up there for whatever reason that he did that. So we are now ready for verse 23. And we're going to jump in there and take 23 through 27. So then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his outer garments and made 4 parts, a part to every soldier, and also the tunic. Now the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece. So they said to one another, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to decide whose it shall be. This was to fulfill Scripture. They divided my outer garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Therefore the soldiers did these things, but standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus then saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, Woman, behold your son. Then he said to the disciple, Behold your mother. From that hour the disciple took her into his own household. I think we may have read that part last week, but I'm not sure we got all the way through that before the bell, as it does, rings on us. So kind of recap that section and begin there for tonight.
Well, so the first thing, and we talked a little bit about it last week, and well, I guess we mostly covered that point, but the soldiers, they play games, they cast lots, they're doing these things, and my aim there was to kind of put us in that position and let us think a little bit about the idea that there are 4 soldiers. Again, that's just likely the number of soldiers that were there. There's a special word for it, the division of soldiers for 4 of them. And another numerical way of putting this is, the soldiers crucified Jesus. They took his garments, divided them into 4 parts, 1 part for each soldier. So there's 4 parts, 1 part for each soldier. And then the 5th part, they were casting lots, so they didn't have to tear it to pieces, so that each one of them got 1/4 of the garment. But there were likely 4 soldiers, and what they're doing here is they're all about themselves. I mean, they're like, this guy, who cares about what's happening behind them? They are deadened to the fact that Jesus is dying. They have no cares in the world. It is just another day to crucify another guy. Jesus has no impact on their lives, and sometimes I think that we can stumble into that, is that the death of Jesus, and even Jesus himself, he's just another guy. It's just another thing. It's just one more part of our life. It's not something that is central to who we are, central to what we're doing. And sometimes, as I was trying to get at, is we can be so distracted by ourselves. We can be so, absorbed, self-absorbed with what we want to do, with different things that's going on in our minds, with our plans, with our jobs, with our schedules, that the cross of Jesus means nothing to us. That sometimes we can get into that mindset. And I tried to say that one of the ways for me specifically that is, and the why I put it up there in those words, they're playing games, because that's for me. For one of the things I like to do, I like to play games on my phone. I have lots of them. They're wonderful. There's this one where you're a potato and you're shooting these monsters. It's really cool. Anyways, there's lots of games that I like to play, but sometimes if you're so self-absorbed with your hobbies, with your shows, with your entertainment, that the cross of Jesus means nothing, that those things mean more to you, or they give a greater period of your time to, then sometimes we can put ourselves in that position of being the soldiers at the foot of the cross, paying no attention to Jesus.
Right.
Because they are 100% absorbed with what they want to do, with what's best for them, what's on their mind. And they're playing games, they're casting lots, they're dividing his clothes, and they're even being so rational about it. It's like, well, why not just tear this up so that we each get a piece of it and it's just rags, but let's each cast lots so that we don't destroy this valuable piece of clothing. And so the soldiers are completely deadened to the fact that Jesus is dying behind them.
Right. And I think it does betray or demonstrate a level of callousness that they had towards death in itself. I mean, how many crucifixions had they seen that week? How many crucifixions had they been participants in due to the Roman system of justice? And maybe it wasn't a regular occurrence in Jerusalem, but within the Roman Empire, it was a regular occurrence that insurrectionists and thieves and them were crucified. So they had seen this before. They had participated in this before. They had, this to Jesus to them, at least at the beginning, there was just another criminal, and they didn't know who Jesus was. They had no reason to know who Jesus was. And are you heading anywhere, into the end, how it ends for them as the Roman soldiers? Am I getting ahead of you if I talk about what they said? Well, so if we look at the other gospel accounts, John doesn't record. As I recall, doesn't record kind of the end of the story when Jesus dies or at the moment of his death. But Luke and Mark both record, a response of the centurion. Luke 23:47, when the centurion saw what had happened, that is the death of Jesus. Jesus says, "Father," in the previous verse, "Father, into the hands I commit my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. And then verse 47, the centurion says, "Certainly this man was innocent." Mark records it a little differently in Mark 15:39, when the centurion who was standing right in front of him saw the way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly this man was the Son of God." And so, the way that Jesus lived had not had an impact necessarily on these soldiers because they were unfamiliar with him. They didn't see him. But the way that Jesus died had an impact on at least one of those soldiers. And so these men who at the beginning are casting lots, gambling for his clothing, participating in his torture, whipping him, putting the crown of thorns on him, spitting on him, those things, by the end, when Jesus dies, at least one of those men is able to confess that Jesus is the Son of God because of what he witnesses in his death. So I think that's a significant part of the story there for us to comment on, even as we're talking about their callousness at the beginning. At least one of them responds. Chuck?
Well, if you look at the Matthew account, whenever the things that happened prior to him giving up the Spirit, he had darkness
Right.
at an unusual hour, and I'm sure things like that probably got the attention of the centurion.
Right.
Like, wow, this hasn't happened before, and
Yeah.
I'm sure there was things like that probably took them away from their gambling or whatever, and they go, wow, what's going on here?
Yeah. And I think we can't discount, the ancillary events or the other events that are taking place with the earthquake and the darkness and the things like that that are happening in conjunction with Jesus being on the cross, and those things together, I'm sure go to help. And Matthew does record that same confession of the soldier in 27:54. When the centurion and those who were with him keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, became very frightened and said, "Truly this was the Son of God." So Matthew almost makes it sound like it's not just the centurion, but the centurion that he's speaking. He's speaking for the group. He's speaking for the whole of them as when he makes that confession, and so they are taking notice of those things as well. There's a lesson in there for us about not just, finishing all the way to the end, because Jesus, finishes his mission not when he is nailed to the cross, but Jesus finishes his mission really when he's raised and is, and is sent back to heaven. But this part of his mission, it doesn't end when he's nailed to the cross. It ends when he breathes his last. And even with that last breath, he is still proclaiming who he is as God's son, and he is still having an impact on those who see him in that moment. Greg?
Yeah, the miracles had to have their effect, but I think the thing that really was probably also the poignant way he handled death and being tortured, and all that he'd been through. So Centurion knew how he had been treated before he ever got to the cross, and he was able to say, "Forgive them; they don't know what they were doing." He saw how he handled the process of being kind to his mother, and just the things that happened that he probably would never seen in somebody who was tortured and dying.
Yeah. And that's a great point. How many times, in all the crucifixions that soldier had seen, and this is a centurion. He's a commander. He's a leader of a, centurion was over 100 soldiers. He was he would be what we think of as like a platoon leader, or a company, even maybe a company commander, where he was, at least a lieutenant, if not a captain, in our way of thinking of military rank. And so he has seen this before. He has led men into battle. He has seen these kind of things before. And how often had he nailed somebody to a cross and then had that person say, "I forgive you for what you've done"? I'm not sure, I can't imagine that he's ever heard those words before. Not that he would have cared what they said typically, but hearing that would have stood out.
When Jesus and the two other guys on the cross would have been interesting, but if he would have heard that, that probably took a big part of him understanding who he really was.
Yeah, he's hearing those things. He's hearing everything that happens there as he stands at on his post at the cross, on guard. So, yeah, he is taking note of every one of those things. And so, as callous as he is at the beginning, participating in the games that surround taking Jesus' clothing, there is there's a heart there that we would not have picked out that person at the beginning of the story as saying that is somebody that would have responded to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I mean, he's not one that we would think is going to be in tune for this and ready to hear it. But by the end of the story, the Jews are still hurling insults at Jesus. Obviously his followers, the ones that are there, the women and John, are still sympathetic to Jesus, but they've been with him the whole time. But here's somebody that you would not expect to receive that message, and he has accepted it by the end, and he's made a confession that you would never have expected. There's a lesson there for us.
Bro said there's a big lesson there for us, because anybody and everybody needs to hear the gospel. Yeah. And we don't know what a person's heart is.
Right.
We absolutely don't.
Absolutely. I agree. Okay, ready for your next point?
Well, yeah. I mean, now you were stepping on my toe. Anyways,
right.
But getting into the next point, the thought that goes along with what Greg was saying and everything is just the difference between Jesus and other people that were going to be crucified. Of just the difference of hearing someone, as Jason pointed out, usually people going to the cross are saying it, maybe this is depending on their trial and how long they've been in prison or whatever, leading up to their capital punishment, is I didn't do it. This is unfair, or, I don't know. What I was trying to get at is the response to being crucified is not usually someone looking down and saying, "Forgive them, they do not know what they do." Right. And that's the exact same thing. That's the attitude of Jesus on the cross had to have been something different. Had to have been something that opened their eyes and made them, look at things. And now that the conversation has moved in this direction, the centurion and the other soldiers there, what their reaction to the cross would have been, specifically with, the temple veil being torn and the hours of darkness and stuff like that, when it comes time for Jesus to be buried, and that's what hopefully we'll get to here in a little bit. The soldiers will pierce his side, and I wonder what the centurion that had professed that faith, what he was doing at that time. If he was one of the ones going around breaking the other people's legs, beating someone's leg until they broke so that they could finish dying, and then they get to the person that they just declared as Jesus, and whether that was, the soldier's centurion, if they were underneath the guy that just said that surely this was the Son of God, what that would have been like. And again, that's all speculation, but that's just more details to the story that says, well, what were these soldiers maybe thinking at this time? But Jesus on the cross, there are the seven recorded sayings of Jesus on the cross, and I put 2 of them up there. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. His attitude was different. But this other thing, and this moves into the last point here, but that we know that Jesus has brothers and sisters. It is said multiple different times that your brothers and sisters are here to essentially take you back. You're the madman of the family. They're here to get you and take you home so that you can't defame them anymore or spoil the family name. They come to get you, to take you home. And he says, these are my mother and these are my brothers. And so we even have references to books of the Bible that will be written by some of Jesus's, likely some of Jesus's brothers. They don't claim to be that. In James's gospel, he doesn't claim I'm the brother of Jesus, but tracing who he is, it is likely that James, who wrote the Gospel of James, is one of Jesus's brothers. But up until this point, his brothers and Jesus do not believe. The brothers of Jesus do not believe. And so as Jesus is dying, obviously he is the firstborn. Obviously he is the one that is supposed to be the caretaker of the family. It is, again, likely, because we don't have any other reference to Joseph other than when Jesus was, I think the last reference to him is when Jesus was in the temple as a child and he was left there. That's the last reference we have of Joseph being alive. It's also likely that Joseph was much older because of the Jewish customs. The Jewish men would marry a Jewish woman who is much, much younger than them. So it is likely that by this point, Joseph has gone on, and Jesus is the main caretaker of his family, of his mother. His mother is now a widow, and in those circumstances, again, this gets more into lots and lots of details on what... We don't have time to get into all of that, but a woman must be attached to a man. The next man in line is now whomever their caretaker would be. There is lots of historical evidence, and specifically for the Roman customs of the time, that a woman was maybe not a second-class citizen, but a little bit less worthful. Yes, and she was reliant on a man, and again, there are lots of other things rolling around in my head about the specific customs of how that would be taken place. But Jesus, as the firstborn, was likely, again, if Joseph was out of the picture, supposed to take care of his mom. He is literally the one that is now, she is supposed to live in his house. She is supposed to be at his, really at his house, being taken care of by him. And so on the cross, Jesus being tortured, being scourged and whipped and having this crown of thorns and being beaten and being nailed to the cross, is still trying to be the caretaker for his family that he needs to be. The other thing, and again, he honors his mother. He will honor his mother saying, hey, I need someone to take care of his mom. He needs some place where she can go to be taken care of, to be loved at this time. She is going to go through a difficult process as well. I think we talked about last week how in Luke chapter 2 in the temple, when they bring Jesus to the temple, the old man there is like, yo, bro, hey, I now get to see Jesus. I've now seen the Redeemer. And in Luke chapter 2, I'm going to go there and read it again. I think it's verse 37, I think. Not quite yet. Verse 20. Oh, there we go. That's why it's a little different here. 34, I believe. 34 and 35, it says, And Simeon, the old man at the temple, blessed them and said to Mary his mother, Behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign that is opposed, and a sword will pierce through your own soul also. So that thoughts from many hearts may be revealed. But that is, again, Mary's going to go through a tough time. Mary's going to, her only son, well, not her only son, her firstborn son is being crucified on a cross before her eyes. I don't know, obviously I don't have children yet, but I can't believe that is a happy occasion. I don't think that there's not a lot of good things going on in her mind. And Jesus trying to take care of a grieving mother, even on the cross, is honoring his mother. Now, one of the last point, and this is where this all kind of flows together, is Jesus' body, and again, I use that term very loosely in this, figuratively is the right way of putting it, figuratively in this sense, is thicker than water, because I wanted to throw that in there because, there's that old saying, blood is thicker than water. Whoever's in the family is who I'm going to care about more than someone outside of my family. My blood, the people that are in my group, are more important than the people in their group. And in this instance, Jesus has other brothers. Jesus has other people that can take care of his mother. Jesus has other people that would be, if not willing, obligated to take care of his mom. But Jesus, knowing that it is more important that his mother be with someone who is a faithful disciple of Jesus, with someone who is a believer, because at this time his brothers are not believers, sends his mother to live with John because he knows that John is a faithful follower of him. And sometimes I think that can be very applicable for our lives. And again, we don't have time to really branch out into all of the ways that this can go on, but that it's better for us to be with Christians than not necessarily than with non-Christians, but specifically in this instance, I think what Jesus was looking at is when John, let's put it this way, John's response to Jesus' death is going to be totally different than his brother's response to his death. If Mary goes home with one of his brothers and hears, well, man, I just can't believe that he would do this, and he left us like this, and it's just so terrible that my older brother's now gone, all of these different things, the way in which Mary would be taken care of and not necessarily spoken to, but engaged with, interacted with Christians is different than with non-Christians. And I think that's important. It has many far-reaching implications with, and this is kind of maybe not a stretch, but another way that it works of raising children. You want them to be around Christians, people that will influence them in a positive way towards faith in Jesus. And I think that's what, might have been kind of going through Jesus' mind here, of that John will promote faith. John will promote this love, this connection that we have together. If my mother goes home to one of my siblings that is really upset with me and frustrated that I have defamed our family and really just drug us through the mud, the difference in the care, the difference in the atmosphere, the difference in the engagement and influence they will have will be way different. Right. And so that's where I was going with that last.
Yeah. How do you suppose John, I would think that this would probably be a boost to John's faith to have Jesus do this, that's the trust and everything that Jesus has for him. I would think that would help in his journey, of life.
Yeah, being someone, and again, I asked this question on our next section, but when John being there, and again, he's the only recorded disciple that we have at the cross. Peter, again, he was close, he was near. We don't know if he followed them to the place of crucifixion. He was there when John lets him through the gate, kind of there at the high priest's house. But we know that John has followed. He's the only recorded disciple to have followed to the cross and have been there. But he is there, and yes, he's being entrusted with Jesus' mother. And as Chuck was saying, that would be a great faith-strengthening time to be entrusted with that and be someone that Jesus thought was capable of doing that for Mary.
I think that's a great point, and the fact that Jesus is able to look at John and say, we even read this section yet? We have, okay. The fact that Jesus is able to look and see that John and Mary are close by each other. There was already a relationship there between them, and the fact that John, in that moment, with the relationship that he had with Jesus, is there anything when you have a friend that you love that much, or a loved one that is that close to you, is there anything that you would not do for them to alleviate their pain if you could? I mean, what would John have withheld from Jesus in that moment? And so when Jesus makes that utterance and says to him, behold your mother, and it says at that hour the disciple took her into his own household. You can picture in that moment, if John didn't already have his arm around Mary, trying to shield her from that or protect her or comfort her, that when Jesus said that in that moment, that John, not just figuratively, but literally took Mary under his care and provided for her from that moment. And that would have been a way, in some way that he could alleviate some pain for Jesus, or that he could, that he could show respect to Jesus in that moment by honoring that request and doing so in a way that was visible to Jesus, and that Jesus knew that John was going to honor that request. And so, I think this is not a simple thing that Jesus asked. It's not they didn't have Social Security. They didn't have, this is not just, I'm going to check in on her once a week and see how she's doing. This is, I've now taken her care to myself, and I'm going to provide for her. This is a big ask that Jesus gives, and it's a full acceptance of that John takes on. So it is it's a big thing. Okay. Sam.
I think it's funny, the original kind of saying about, blood is thicker than water is that the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, which, the point's proven still in what, you were up there, but, the bonds that are chosen that we forge for ourselves are supposed to be stronger than the ones we're born with. I think
That's good.
Jesus proves that point, obviously. He chooses one of his own disciples rather than his own siblings to take care of his own mother, but...
Right. That's a good point. Okay.
The first section completed.
Yeah. All right. John 28 through 30. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things had already been accomplished to fulfill the scripture, said, I am thirsty. A jar of sour wine was standing there, so that they put a sponge full of the sour wine upon a branch of hyssop and brought it up to his mouth. Therefore, when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, it is finished. And he bowed his head and gave up the spirit.
Oh boy. Alrighty, well, continuing apace. So long story short, I love saying that, it's wonderful. Long story short, so one of the things that I did want to say here is there's two different times that Jesus is offered, I don't know if we want to call it drink, but something to drink on the cross. At the beginning of the crucifixion, it is said that he was given the opportunity to partake of wine mixed with a sort of painkiller kind of a thing. That is not this time. This is a different time at the very end of his crucifixion. And again, the reason why that was done is because, again, there is historical evidence to suggest that there was a group of humanitarian. They were most likely women. It was called the Sisters of Something or the Daughters of Something, where they would allow the people going through crucifixion to have something like a painkiller so that they might, be more humanistic about brutally murdering people. And Jesus at that time denied that drink, if you will. But at this point, at the very end of his crucifixion, he says, I thirst. A jar of sour wine stood there, so they gave him a sponge with sour wine, with hyssop on a branch, and the hyssop part, we'll get to that in just a second, and held it to his mouth. When Jesus received the sour wine, he said, it is finished, and bowed his head and gave up his spirit. So obviously, this part of John is taking us so long to go through because each snippet can be a whole sermon on its own. So I'm going to have to condense this entire sermon down to a couple of words here. So, long story short, I put the Greek up there again. It's telestai. Now that is in the perfect sense, I believe. It is completed. And so this word comes from tello. It is finished. It is completed. It is perfected. It's the same word used for, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. This word shows up in many different historical, extra-biblical places, and I think about every single one of them are included here that Jesus will fulfill at this point. First off, this word would be used tetelestai when a master and a servant has given his mission. He said, okay, go and, pick the apples from the orchard. And he goes and he picks all the apples and he puts them in a basket and he brings in and he comes back to his master saying, it is finished, it is accomplished, it is done. I have completed the mission. I've completed the task. I have accomplished what is needed. And that's why I think it's the song, I know that it is finished, it is accomplished. Those words are continuously woven back in because they have the same sort of message here. And I think that this could be another way that we could metaphorically see what Jesus is trying to say here. He's trying to say to his master, to God. He's saying, it is accomplished. The mission that I was given to do, to come to this earth and to die for the sins of men, the wrath of God being poured out on me, that is finished. That mission that I was given, the reason why I became flesh, the reason why I live on this earth has been accomplished. It is finished. It is accomplished and it is done. Now, again, as he says, he will come back, and there are other things that I would say are not finished just yet. He will still give the apostles many different words of encouragement. And so he still has some things that he will choose to do after his resurrection. But the ultimate goal, the ultimate thing that is accomplished, the ultimate thing that is finished, is the mission to bring back, or really to offer a way of salvation, to offer a sacrifice. That way, I believe if we boil down his mission to specifically salvation, it was to offer a blameless and perfect sacrifice. The reason why he was tempted in the desert was because he needed to prove himself perfect. He needed to prove himself without blemish. And so the reason why he was able to be tempted, the reason why he went through temptation, was to show at the end of his life that there is a perfect, blameless, spotless lamb that is ready to be sacrificed. And so that mission was finished. That mission was completed. He lived his life as God without sinning. Another way that this word would come up is it is the Hebrew equivalent of the word that the high priest or the priest would say, referencing the spotless lamb that you were to bring before him. It is perfect. It is complete. It is whole. It is 100% good enough. It is a sacrifice that is wonderful. And again, that word, it is perfect. It is complete. It is finished. It is good, kind of. Would be perfectly used in this instance with Jesus, that it is finished. One of the things that goes into this next deal up here, the hyssop, was the high priest would use hyssop. It's a reedy stalk-like plant, and it was on the Day of Atonement when they go into the mercy seat. They would use the hyssop to pour the blood of the sacrifice and dip it in there, and they would slash the blood of the sacrifice onto the Ark of the Covenant, onto the mercy seat. And there were specific ways at specific times, and they had to have a shroud, and there were so many things that go into this. It's a great study. It applies to Hebrews. The book of Hebrews does a great job of applying that. But the hyssop there being another metaphor, another great symbol of this death of Jesus. It's in Exodus 12:22. It is the blood of the lamb that they're to kill for the Passover when the plague comes, where God, the Spirit of God, will kill the firstborn, that the Israelites were told to slaughter the lamb, and with the blood of the lamb, with a stalk of hyssop, to smear the blood over the doorpost. And so this hyssop that Jesus is, again, it's showing up. It's not really smearing his blood. It is something that is being used to deliver this sour wine to his mouth, but it is still a symbol that shows up in Exodus and in the crucifixion of Jesus. Hebrews 9 and 19, just another example of when hyssop shows up. When Moses proclaimed every commandment of the law to the people, he took the blood of the calves together with water, scarlet wool, and branches of hyssop, and sprinkled the scroll and all the people. It is a symbol, a religious icon, if you will, that shows up here at Jesus' death. But again, with the word tetelestai, it shows up many other times, but the last one that I wanted to bring up is in an accounting term. So if someone were to give you a bill and they send you your invoice, and they, you write the check, you send it back, and you pay your debt off, they would send you back this, or written on your bill would be the word tetelestai. It is finished. It is the paid in full is essentially what it means. It is paid up to the brim. The debt that was lacking, the thing that wasn't here to make it complete, is now complete. The debt that was owed has now been paid. And so the word tetelestai, it is paid, it is full, it is finished, it is completed, it is the cup runneth over. The debt has been paid at the cross. The debt for our sin was paid, and it was paid in full. It was completed, it was finished, it was to the utmost done away with and wiped away. And so that word, it is finished, again, you could preach a whole sermon on that, and I know I just kind of gave you a mini one, but it is a deeply rooted word that has many meanings. Jesus, it is accomplished, it is perfect, and it is paid in full for each of us because of Jesus, what he did on the cross.
I think an interesting thread through the book of John, we've kind of mentioned it on numerous occasions, the idea of Jesus several times through the book of John says, my hour has not yet come, or my time has not yet come. And then starting in chapter 13, with the observance of the Passover, the Last Supper, he's got Jesus is doing all these things because his hour now has come. And all through that encounter with the disciples, he's, the hour is now, it's come. It's time to go do this. It's time to go do that. It's time to go to the garden. It's time to be delivered over to to Pilate and all of those things. And so, this is the final conclusion of that whole series of events that Jesus knew he was being led to. So he does things at the proper time, in the proper order, to their full conclusion. And he doesn't leave anything undone that needs to be done. And once everything is finished that needs to be done, he makes that declaration. It's finished. I don't need to linger anymore. I don't need to stay on the cross and suffer anymore. I don't need to breathe anymore. I don't need to observe any more prophecies or whatever, because everything has been finished that we set out to accomplish. And so the conclusion is here. And he makes that declaration and then breathes his last. So it's a much more than a declaration of I've suffered enough, it's time to die. It's a final declaration of concluding all of the things that God had called him to do up to that point, that he constantly was mindful of. When it wasn't time to do those things, he didn't do them. When it finally was time to do it, he did it, and now it's done, and I can go. So it's a culmination of many, many things.
Well, and the last thing that I wanted to throw out there with the Greek there, tetelestai, it's a perfect verb, and again, if you want to be, I don't know, you don't want to make mountains out of molehills, but, being a perfect verb means
Explain that to the non-Greekers like us.
Okay, well,
Perfect is a tense.
Yes, it's a tense of wordage, of verbiage, if you will. So,
They had different tenses in Greek, but we have past, present, and future. I mean, that's kind of what we have in English.
Well, yeah, and past, present, and future is in English is modified in order to make these tenses come about. And so another way of translating this is it has been finished. Again, it's a past tense. Well, it's a perfect tense, but it's an action that happened in the past, but it has a present result. It is something that is continuously happening. And so, it's like I have been running. It is something that happened in the past. I started back here, and I'm still doing it right now. And so it has been finished. It was finished at this point in time, and it will continue to be finished, and it will continue to be completed, and will continue to be perfected until the end, which in this case is never. essentially. I mean, once the word meaning it started happening and it is continuously happening, it is finished, and again, the word itself implies that something is over, but it is completely done, and it will continue forever. So that's again a great word there, a great a declaration of victory, not a cry of defeat. It is finished, it is done, it is over. The last point that I had, Jesus' death, we talked about this a little bit last week, so briefly briefly, as I say that a lot, but briefly, it's an unnatural occurrence. Romans 3:23, the wages of sin is death. Jesus knew no sin, and as Paul will say, he made him who knew no sin to become sin on our behalf. And so Jesus, taking on the sin of the world, he shouldn't have had to die, and death had no claim on him. There was no sin in his life to give that power over to sin. It's an unnatural occurrence. It should not have happened because Jesus never sinned. But he became sin, and he took on our sin. The wrath of God was poured out on him, and therefore the death was possible, if you will, because of that. Death was also possible because of Jesus' authority. Jesus has the authority to lay his life down and to take it up. We talked about this last week, when it said, Chuck brought this up, that, when he breathed his last, he bowed his head and gave up. The word didomi, again, that's another Greek word, but it is, I have something and I am freely, willingly giving it over. I am giving it up and giving up his spirit, because death could not take him. He had to give his life in order for his body to die. One of the things that I wanted to kind of bring up is in John 20, just the next chapter over. This is Jesus appearing to his disciples, and we know this from the story of doubting Thomas a little while later. But it says, John 20, verse 20, says, when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. And obviously, they will pierce his side in just a second. But the thing I wanted to bring up was Jesus can live with these wounds. These wounds didn't do him in. He will be surviving, living. I don't know if breathing is the right way, because he was when he is resurrected, in his resurrected body. Paul will also say we will have a body like his that is incorruptible and imperishable. But at this time, when he reappears to the disciples, he still has these wounds. These wounds are still on his body, and yet he is still living. And so these wounds were not the cause of Jesus' death. The reason why he died was not because of blood loss. The reason why he died was not because, he just couldn't take it anymore. The reason that he died was that he chose to do so. He chose to release his spirit. He chose to give it up. And he chose to die and give his life for us. It was not forced on him. It wasn't necessarily even circumstances that surrounded his death that killed him. It was his own choice of laying his life down and giving it up.
Johnny.
Another way to see that this was the case was the fact that when they came around to break their legs, he was unexpectedly dead. They expected him to be alive at that point.
You're right. Not enough time had passed for them on the cross for them to have died. People could linger for days on the cross, and often did, but they were. This is another instance of them honoring the Jewish customs, even as Romans who didn't really care about the Jewish customs. They honored the Jewish customs and would not leave them hanging on the cross for the Sabbath. And so, so the Romans made concessions to them because of their religious customs. So it was not a Roman custom to go around and break their legs. That would have shown mercy, and the Romans didn't care about that. And so they did so to strictly to honor the Jewish customs, and would not have expected Jesus to have died that quickly. And I think it all ties back into the declaration that Jesus has made that it is finished. It's not just it's not a physical thing that it is finished. I think the best thing he said was it was not a cry of defeat. It was a statement of victory. That Jesus is declaring that. It's done. We've accomplished what we set out to do, and so because we've accomplished what we've set out to do, there's no going beyond that. There's no need to continue doing what we're doing here because it's done. And so the price has been paid for sin. And so the death is the final, the wages of sin is death. Death has to take place. It's not that he had suffered enough up to that point. It was that everything that needed to happen in order for him to die, because death had to take place in order for the payment for sin to be made. The final step to be taken was that death, and at his death is when the price for sin was paid. And so it is finished, pay the price, declare the accounting full, and so that's what he did. Great.
A couple of medical observations. One thing I'm sure that influenced the centurion and others was people didn't decide when they were going to die. And
Right.
they didn't state, they were going to die. They just slipped into coma. And you may know and have heard why breaking the legs was a very effective way of shortening the process. They couldn't breathe unless they pushed up
Right.
with their legs. And so that they would quickly suffocate. Plus, if you break a leg, it's common to lose a couple, 3 units of blood into each leg. And so they would also be bleeding to death. I've heard several accounts on why there was blood and water, and when the spear went into Jesus' side. And if it was in the chest, I don't know. I mean, the only way you get water there is if you've had bleeding and then the blood separates and the serum then, so if you've had a hemothorax where the blood's been there long enough that it separates, and he'd been beaten so many times, that could have been the case. Or if it was in the abdomen, it would have to be ascites, where he'd had so many blows that his liver was failing. I don't know of any spiritual reason that it was blood and water, but I think you can make some analogies in that. But on the medical side, I don't think you could say with any confidence, why.
Was it evidence that he was physically dead?
I think that it goes to that, and again, we're dealing with Roman soldiers who had witnessed death. These men were not. This was not the junior varsity squad that had never crucified anyone before. This was their job. This is part of what they did as their job as Roman soldiers in this garrison was to take care of the executions. They had witnessed crucifixions. They knew what death looked like. And so they understood that when they saw Jesus that he was dead, the spear thrust to the side is a final confirmation of that death, not a questioning that he is dead, but a confirmation that he is dead. Because if they had any question at all, they would have broken his legs. They didn't break his legs because they knew he was dead, and that spear thrust is a confirmation of that death.
And that's a fulfilled prophecy of that not a bone
Not a bone of his body was broken, right? And so, well, we made it a little ways closer to the end, but it has been good discussion. I do appreciate the work that Justin's done on these things to help us understand. I appreciate the comments that you all make, and this is not one that we want to rush through. I don't feel bad for taking our time through this section, so it's something that is good for us to really consider and ponder. So we'll pick up in verse 31 next week.